Alright, so now we're going to look at examples of simple meshes and how to lay out the UVs on them. It is no doubt when you get done with this course, you'll look at modeling a lot different. Before, you might have looked at modeling as putting a bunch of these primitives together in some fashion, but never joining them. You might have been into a different workflow of curves and how to get objects and curves together to make surface. There's so many different ways, but after this course, I think you'll pick one. And what I want to show you here is how I kind of think of the primitives and the creation thereof in a box modeling world and how to unwrap them. So right now I have a box. That's pretty common. Now from a box I can get a sphere, and what I like to do is go mesh smooth and mesh smooth. This is a perfect sphere, great for higher levels of subdividing, and as you go up in subdivision levels, it all stays very quadratic. So I got quads going all the way around this, where if I have this ball, it has a polar cap or an extraordinary vertice at the very top that has a bunch of triangles that meet. So after a while, if I went to mesh smooth this, this gets even more jacked up here, and it's not sculptable. So later on also you might look at sculptability, and these things all tile together. Basically never use the primitives up here. I always kind of think of a box and making the box into a ball. I can also make the box into a cylinder. So take the top and bottom and extrude once, and then mesh smooth. Now I got a cylinder. Deeper complex shapes as like that is concerned, let's go into maybe another cube. Extrude the top. Go like this. Delete. Delete. I like to modify center pivot here. Hit extrude. Extrude up. Okay, sometimes I use that shape. But what I like to do is show its counterpart. Shift D, duplicate that one. And its counterpart, the Taurus. So I use that one all the time, absolutely all the time. So those are some of the basic shapes. I mean, it can go further. Let's say you wanted to make a pyramid, which I don't use very often in modeling, but here's how that works. You take the vertices and you scale them all the way in. Let's go a stud instead of a pyramid. So this one right here I'm looking at. I extrude the top and extrude the bottom, and then mesh smooth it. There we go. And maybe we'll keep that one too. So that's how you make the very basic shapes. Let's now look at how to UV each and every one of these. That way you can get an idea on how the workflow works on practical applications. Alright, so now let's look at the methods of unwrapping these. Let's apply our texture to each and every one of these, or material to them. Middle mouse button clicking, dragging these out. And you can see some of them are already pretty well laid out, the other ones are not. Okay, but they're not laid out correctly. Now, in this case, it looks correct, but it's not. This one, good to go. If you look at the UV textures, I got this, and this is the basic shape. The only thing I would like to have is all these to go in the same direction if I needed them. Let's say I needed to make a cardboard box with the texture on the cardboard with a label right here. I would need those to be all in the same direction. I'm not doing that, so there we go. Also, I should say that if it's not a perfect box, let's say it's like this, I have to be wary of that. This is ununiformed, so therefore it is broken. So that's where you would go to automatic mapping and then fix it. So edge, moving so. And then like this. Let's see what that did. And look at that. Pretty much good, except for what, the 2 5s and 7s. So had I done what I did before in the past, like methodically did the workflow, it would have been all right. So again, workflow kind of goes like this. Automatic mapping first. Choose the surface directions that you want. Make sure you fix those first. So control right click to UV. W on the keyboard. Move them out. Choose what direction you want them. I like using the UV shell tool here. Rotating them till they make sense. That one makes sense. Then grabbing the edges that you need. Again, going to the move tool. Grab edge. Moving so. Now later on also you'll know that sometimes it's much better to leave this off because that way it fits better on the 0 to 1. But for right now, let's just say that this one goes over here. We'll talk about resolution probably in the next unit. There we go. So that's perfectly laid out and all my directions are what I need them to be. And now I can go to layout and it matches. See how big the squares got? The bigger the squares, the less the resolution. Okay, so this one's a little bit different. I'm going to move this one out of the way and focus on this one. Let's say I needed this to be a little bit different. I'm going to use the projection method for this one. So I'm going to jump into the top view, create UVs, planar map, square box, and on my top view camera, I'm just using camera, hitting apply. Okay, so let me jump back into perspective view. By the way, you can jump into perspective view by hitting these buttons. I have hotkeys for control 1, 3, and 7 to jump between top, left, and right, or top, front, and right, but you do not need those. They just are nice to have. Don't have a video for that though. So here, what I want to do is cut this object and lay it out. Okay, so edge, double click on it. I will hit cut. That will give me 2 shells. Control right click to shell, W on the keyboard. Notice how I selected that. I clicked on the UV, but I did not click and drag. Don't do that because it'll highlight both. Just click on one single UV, control right click to shell. Now I have a negative W. So grab this one, flip it. Now you can see that the texture is ununiformed. Basically the squares on the top are smaller and the ones on the side are very stretched out. So that's where unfolding comes in. I can grab these and click this and unfold. Grab this one, unfold. Now the texture has better uniformity. It's not perfect, but it's better. Okay? And you're never going to get it absolutely perfect because this is more of an organic object. But being close like that counts. The texture seam in the middle is kind of annoying, but I like the overall shape of it. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do this cylindrical object. Okay, to start out with, we want it to match here. Definitely does not look like a cylinder. So I'll jump into this. So here's a side view of the cylinder. Let's go to face and grab all the faces here to here. Okay, this is where I use cylindrical mapping. Cylindrical mapping is just the camera rotates around the object really super fast. Just like that. Now cylindrical mapping, on those faces right there only, you can see that some of them are uniform, some of them are not. And they're basically they're stretched rectangular a little bit. So I need to fix that, and I can fix that by just going like this. So I can grab this manipulator handle and then make it so all these are squares. That's what I'm looking for, is the uniformity of those checkers. Okay, so the top and bottom clearly do not have good UVs. This one does, however, so I can grab the UVs, go to shell. So this is the sides, these are the tops. Okay, let's go to face, highlight them here. It's much easier to highlight the faces here than it would be to come over here and highlight each face. So UVs are very handy in the selection methods also. Jump into the top, create UVs planar mapping, and there we go, we got those laid out. I have red over here, which indicates an overlapping UV or a negative W, so let's go in here and go shell selection, shell. This one needs to be flipped, and look how perfect that is, right? Okay, so now grab all the UVs and go to layout. So now they're on the 0 to 1, which is very important, and it's all uniformed. Does it matter that the squares are not matched up? Absolutely not. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the fact that it has good uniformity. Okay, next. Okay, so this is a two-part method. I think the best method for this one would be like an automatic mapping. That's going to take a really long time, however, right? Because then I would have to choose all the directions and yada, yada, yada. So let's look at a different method for this. We now know cylindrical mapping. So let's grab all the sides and cylindrical map those. Grab the UVs and go to shell and then W on the keyboard. Okay, the red indicates that I have some overlapping UVs, and those are in the center there. You can see that. So in this method, I can grab the edge here and the edge here and cut those. Grab a UV to shell, move this shell out of the way. Oh, my bad. I did not have to do that. Let's start over. Let's grab the object, grab the faces, and hit cylindrical. Sorry, I don't edit. UV, grab one UV, go to shell, W on the keyboard, there we go. by doing a cylindrical mapping, it already dictated one of the edges to be cut, and that's where I made the mistake. Easy mistake to recover from, and what I now need to do is make sure that these are uniformed. They are rectangular. That's not right. These are two different sizes, however, so the first shell, I'll have to scale this way until I see squares. So like that. And this one, the same. And I'm looking at the size of those squares to kind of see that they match up. Okay, this is a negative shell. I don't like those, so let's flip that around. Now I have the surface direction correct. See, all the 5s and 7s are the right way. These just need to be upscaled. And you can see sometimes that if you grab these objects and try to upscale them, they do some wonky stuff. So be very careful. Take some patience here. Especially the manipulator handle in the UV texture editor window. So there we go. We have everything. It's all uniformed, and now I just need to lay it back out. Good. Lost a lot of resolution there. Again, we'll cover resolution next unit. Object mode. Here's a Taurus. This kind of like the ball, in the fact that you have to jump into the top view and planar map it. Grab the edge, cut it, UV, just one UV, to shell. And I'll probably have to cut the inside and outside. So on the inside here, I have to also cut that. There we go. Again, we have a negative shell. And again, we need to do some unfolding. Just like that. Grab this one and unfold it. There we go. Perfectly uniformed. Last but not least, this one. This one's fun. Jump into the top view and do a planar map. We can apply that texture to it, and you can see that it looks awful, but in this view it looks perfect, okay, because I took a shot straight down at it. Alright, what I'm going to do here is cut the bottom. That'll leave me two shells. Control right click to shell. Here's my negative shell. Flip that around. So if you do not flip those around, when you go to unfold them, they will fold in on each other. So if you're getting that, that's why. This I'm choosing where to cut. And this one's a complex shape, in my opinion. So in this case, I'm making this thing called a windmill. And I'm going to cut it. And take the UVs. And unfold it. I'm going to use this unfolding method. It's a little faster for it. Now the only bad downside to this is it's got a lot of texture seams, but the uniformity is all there. So for that shape, there's so many different ways to do it. There's a cylindrical way to do it, and then there's a top-down planar mapping version. Depending upon what you're using that object for, you'd have to choose which one you want to go with. So here I'm just trying to get the squares the same size. Again, patience is a virtue with the selection handle. and UVs, grab them, and lay out. All right, perfect. So you've successfully mapped out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 objects. And just make sure that they're all on the 0 to 1, like this one right here I forgot, and create UVs, layout. Good. And let's lay them back into their configuration. Now, why is it so important that they all be uniformed? You know what I mean? Like, why is the square so important that they need to be lined up like this? And I want to show you that real quick. So let's do that. All right, so to understand how uniformity plays in, we're going to find a texture. Again, something like rust. Let's go to images. Let's go to search tools. Let's drop this down to larger than and drop it down to something that we want to get to as a mapping is. So 6 or 8 or 10 megapixels is where I aim because I want 2048. And this is close. This is too close, so I'm going to go 8 megapixels. And that way I have some to trim. So 2048 is the size of the map I want. So I might have to go 8 megapixels because that'll give me some larger resolution ones. Okay, so here I'm just going to choose a texture. Doesn't really matter which one I use. This high contrast one. I went into view image there. I should be able to scale in. See how far I can scale in? Okay, so zooming in, good stuff. Copy image, and let's go into Photoshop and go File, New, OK, Edit, Paste. Okay, so here's my marquee selection tool. I like to go fixed size, and for this example I'm just going to type in 2048. There's a lot of ways to do this, but this will keep it true, and we'll go into the different methods. So there's a 2048 right there. Now clearly I could go higher than this, and what I can do is go transform selection by right clicking on it. Holding shift, I can select more, and now I have a 2048 square, but it's bigger. Okay, so hit the move tool and apply it. Image crop. And I need this to be 2048, however. So I can go back down by going to image size. So now this is 3,600. Let's say 2048. Good. Yields a good map, and by shrinking it, it added a little bit more resolution to it, but we'll get into that too later. Save as. Let's save this as a TIFF. I want to get you guys to use those often. And we'll go to Rust. No layers. Okay. So in Maya, let's go like this. Window, rendering editors, Hypershade. And let's go into textures. And click and drag Rust in. Double click on it, and then double click this one to get a real-time preview. Close that out. We'll choose a Lambert. Rename it, right click, rename, name it Rust. Middle mouse button, click and drag it to Rust and hit color. Alright, so now let's take these objects and duplicate them. Shift D to duplicate. Middle mouse button, click and drag them to each object, the material. Okay, so there we go. We have now this cool rust pattern, but the rust is perfectly uniformed on the surface. In other words, if I was to off-click this surface and then go to wireframe on shading, you could barely tell that there was any seams. And you can see where seams are. Let's say right here. That one is where we would have to think about where to place the seam on that. But at a distance, you can't hardly tell where the seams are at. That's good. You can also see a correlation between resolution. Let's say this ball represents a really good resolution. I can clearly get to about right here, and it doesn't get blurry, and you can see why. The squares here are small, so the resolution is large. We can also see that in the UV texture editor window, and why that is. Why are they small? Well, it's because I forgot to lay out the UVs correctly. So we can go outside the UVs, but what will happen then, it will ruin workflows. So it's better to upscale your texture than it is to upscale your UVs. Because you can see here, if you get too far out of bounds, you get seams. So we'll lay this out. We've lost resolution. The texture got bigger, but now it's on the 0 to 1, and there's hardly any seams. Alright, so that's the important part. If by chance, let's say one of these, the UVs here, got larger, you can see what happens. The texture is now either bigger or smaller in this area, and it doesn't make sense. And that's why it's so important to have uniform checker pattern. Because if you don't have uniform checker pattern, that means you're going to have areas where the mapping or the texture is bigger or smaller, and it's not going to match up. So there we go. We've unwrapped these objects. I've showed you how to lay out the checker pattern on it by doing the UVs, and I've applied a texture to it to show you the relevancy of why we do the things we do. So let's move on.